your weekly World Climate Change News Report. I'm Irene Zelinsky. This week, our stories cover the coronavirus cutting carbon emissions, Antarctica losing 20% of its snow, the need for low-carbon investments, catastrophic climate change warnings, firms being prompted to adopt green policies, JP Morgan Chase withdrawing support from fossil fuels, the UN Secretary General's indications of top actions against climate change, consumption and production's effects on climate change, Zimbabwe's environmental effects from climate change, and the severity of the UK's floods. Rolling into our first story, the coronavirus cuts carbon emissions. In the past month, the world has seen a remarkably large drop in emissions of carbon dioxide. The reason is the coronavirus outbreak in China, which has sickened at least 77,000 people, shut down factories, refineries, and flights across the country and the globe as officials order people to stay home. As a result, China's carbon dioxide emissions over the last 3 weeks have been about 25% lower than last year. Our next story, an island in Antarctica loses 20% of its snow. NASA's reported an unusual heat wave, which melted a quarter of one of Antarctica's northern islands. This particular heat wave was the highest contributor to sea level rise this summer. Coastal regions are most affected due to this effect. The northern peninsula of Antarctica is usually the coldest region of the continent due to strong winds, but this time the region received unusually weak winds, making it notoriously difficult to withstand the heat. Our third story, low carbon investments need to double. A recent study found that European companies should double their spending on low-carbon projects to meet the European Commission's target goal of net neutrality by 2050. The study, conducted by consultancy group Oliver Wyman, looked at 882 publicly traded companies and found that the total investment in low-carbon projects needs to be 25% of the total investment. The study argued that policy action is needed to facilitate action against climate change. Our next story, economists warn of catastrophic climate change outcomes. JP Morgan Chase economists, in a new report independent from the company, warned that climate change could lead to catastrophic and irreversible outcomes. Climate change will affect the growth of the economy shares, as well as the lifespan of individuals in countries to come. The report also suggests that there is a likelihood of famine, water scarcity, loss of biodiversity, conflicts, and political stress. This firm recommends cutting carbon emissions to net zero by 2050 and by imposing a global tax on carbon. Next up, accountants to prompt firms to adopt green policies. The Institute of Chartered Accountants in England and Wales, alongside other industry groups, are urging accountants to prepare global companies for a climate emergency and encourage firms to set strategies to deal with climate change. After the launch of a review from the Financial Reporting Council, analyzing whether companies and auditors are adequately considering the financial risks of the climate crisis, Chief Executive Michael Issa stressed the importance of chartered accountants using their quote-unquote unique position to make the case for sustainability. Next up, JP Morgan Chase pledges to withdraw support for fossil fuels. The world's largest financer of fossil fuels, JP Morgan Chase, has joined the fight against climate change by pledging to end fossil fuel loans for oil drilling in the Arctic and phase out loans for coal mining. The company aims to offer $200 billion towards environmental and economic deals to support clean energy and other sustainable projects. In the past, this financer has provided $75 billion worth of financial support towards shale fracking and Arctic oil and gas exploration since the Paris Climate Change Agreement. Next, the UN Secretary General indicates top actions against the climate change crisis. Glasgow will host the 26th summit of the Conference of the Parties in November this year. In the most recent weeks, Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, has spoken at several events emphasizing the role that governments have in ensuring the 1.5-degree temperature increase is not surpassed, focusing on adaptation and finance as well as climate change mitigation. The primary focus of the COP26 will be to increase the ambition of all participating countries in terms of effective climate change. Next, consumption and production are part of the climate change crisis. Climate activist Greta Thunberg accused developed economies of shirking their carbon responsibilities because their measures of greenhouse gas emissions fail to consider the gases emitted when imported goods are produced in other countries. China confirms this theory because about 15% of their country's emissions are generated by the production of goods consumed in other countries. To make a real impact here, the advanced economies should take a stronger position in the fight against climate change. Our next story, Zimbabwe's natural habitat is suffering at the hands of climate change. Amina Mohammed, the United Nations chief, visited Zimbabwe recently this week and witnessed firsthand the adverse effects of climate change on the environment and animals. One of the main issues is the lack of water as a result of less rainfall in the region, and this has led to over 400 bird and 150 animal species struggling to survive in these new conditions. While the country is taking actionable steps such as solar-powered watering holes, there is unfortunately still more to be done to protect the environmental conditions and prevent further extinction of species. And finally, our last story, the UK's floods will be frequent and severe because of climate change. Jamie Hannaford, the principal hydrologist at the UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology, stated that climate change projections paint a bleak picture for the UK, as they suggest it is possible for the UK to face an increase in flood severity in the future. There is a basic link between climate change and the flooding in the nation, as warmer weather continues to rise not only in the country but across the globe. The increasing trends in flooding in the past few decades in parts of the northern and southern Western Britain surely is consistent with a warming world. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe for weekly world climate change news updates every Saturday.